Hello and welcome to my next installment on making wine at home using the Vino Italiano wine kit. This is the secondary fermentation. It's the second part after the primary fermentation. So let's get started. Alright YouTube, here we are. We're ready to do our secondary fermentation. If we look at the triple scale hydrometer, we can see that it's gone down quite a bit. That fermentation has been going pretty well, and we're ready for the next step. I'll try to turn that around for you so you can see. Where we're at here. Alright, we're around 1.0. Around that area. Yesterday it was 1.2. So we are going to get ready to transfer our wine from this bucket to a carboy that I've cleaned and sanitized. There's my carboy. Okay, so I've cleaned and sanitized the carboy. I've cleaned and sanitized the tubing and spoon, stirring spoon, and one of the things I've discovered is that if you heat the tubing with some hot water, it more easily goes over the spigot if you have a spigot. So you don't want to snap that off right now. If you did, you would have a big mess on your hands. So that's one of the things I've done, is I've heated up that tube under some hot water, and it more easily slips over the end of the spigot. Now, our directions say basically at this point would be to transfer the wine from this bucket to our carboy. That's all well and good, but we're going to be deviating from the instructions a little bit. One of the things I'm doing, and it's a stylistic thing that I would do at this time, would be to add some Yeast Nutrient. I have a thing of Yeast Nutrient here. And you can see it says 1 teaspoon per gallon, so we're going to put in 5 teaspoons of Yeast Nutrient into the wine, just to help it finish up its secondary fermentation. Another thing that I'm going to be doing, which deviates from the instructions, is I'm going to be stirring the sediment back up into the wine. Now typically you would be transferring off of the sediment and leaving the sediment behind, but I'm going to be stirring that in. Oh, I forgot to take out my triple scale hydrometer. I'm going to be stirring that in, suspending it back in the solution into the wine, so that the sediment is now going to be floating around in the wine once again. And the reason I do that, I think it improves the body and flavor. We are going to allow that to continue to be in the wine just for now. On future rackings, we are going to rack off of it. We're going to let the sediment sink to the bottom. But for now, I am deviating from the instructions and doing that, stirring that in. Okay, once I have it good and stirred up, what I'm going to do is, and again, this is one of the pros of having a spigot on your bucket. That's all I have to do now is turn that, and the wine will transfer down into my carboy. See it going? Okay. Now, if you didn't have a spigot, you'd have to use a siphon. Auto siphon or a regular siphon. Just a little bit more difficult to transfer the wine from one to the other. The directions say to allow the wine to splash in here. So you can just raise the tube a little bit and allow it to splash if you want. I'm just going to let this go. Now, another thing that we're going to do here that deviates from the instructions is we're also going to be adding not only are we adding the yeast nutrient, we're also going to be adding some oak to this carboy. Alright, so we're going to let that go a little bit. We'll check back in a little while when it's completely transferred over, and we'll take it from there. Okay, while that's transferring over there, I just wanted to show you the bag of the oak chips that I have. This is French oak chips. They're the medium toast. I could get this from a homebrew shop, winemaking shop. You can get it online. You can get it from my Amazon store from my website, www.cooking-italian-recipes.com. But you can get this even at your local homebrew shop, and it's a French oak chips with a medium toast. They toast it under some heat. It says here, soak in water an hour before adding. This is enough for 25 gallons. I'm not going to be soaking it in water. We're just going to add it to the carboy after this wine is transferred over. Okay, and if we could see, wine is still transferring over. I'm going to let that continue to go. Alright, check back in another second. Okay, wine is finished transferring. At this point we're going to be adding our yeast nutrient. Now this is, we're going to need 5 teaspoons. So this is 3 out of 5. You can see the wine just start to go, the yeast just starts to get very happy. Once I add that to there. And here is another roughly 2 teaspoons that we're adding. And you can see, here I want to show you, well, you can see the wine, the yeast, basically moving around. Once I added that in, I'm going to take the back end of my spoon that I've cleaned and sanitized again and stir that around like that. Take this out, rinse it off. And next we're going to be adding our oak chips. Now, most wines that I buy, I think, have too much, most commercial wines have too much oak in them. I don't like the way an excessive oaky wine tastes. Many of the commercial wines, I believe, have an excessive amount of oak. While many of them have an excessive amount of oak, I believe some oak is necessary. So what I've done is I've taken from that bag in my hand here, I have just a little handful of oak. Not a whole lot, but a handful. Of course, I've washed my hands pretty good, and I'm going to add this oak to the wine. It's not a whole lot of oak. You'll see it floating on the top of the wine. Okay, and you can see also that this is a 6-gallon carboy, but it's not filled all the way to the top, obviously, because we've made this kit to 5 gallons. If you follow from the first video, we've made this kit to 5 gallons, and so our deviation so far from the instructions are we've made the kit to 5 gallons, we've added oak, and we've added Yeast Nutrient. Now again, any of these things you could change. You can make your wine exactly as the instructions say, and you'll come out with perfectly acceptable results. The thing is, I want outstanding results, so I've stylistically changed what I do with these kits. I've done several of these so far, so I would say they're inexpensive enough to play around with, to experiment with. This is what I've gotten really, really great results with. Okay, I've made them to 5 gallons. I've added oak. I've added Yeast Nutrient, and I've stirred the sediment back into the wine after the primary fermentation. That's what the Mosty kits do. So I'm doing that here, even though the instructions say not to do that. Well, here I am. So the next step would be to put our bung and airlock on top. I'm going to get a bung and airlock, sanitize them, and I'll put them on, show you how that works. Okay, so I have my airlock and bung, and I'm just going to place that in the top of this carboy. And you'll see that the fermentation is still going there, especially since I put the yeast nutrient in. It's going to help it to continue to ferment. Again, you don't need to put the yeast nutrient in, but I like my wines pretty much bone dry if I'm making, you know, a nice Italian red, or something that I would expect to be dry. So I, just to help it out a little bit, I add a little bit. You don't have to. I've made many kits without using the yeast nutrient, especially since it's a little bit colder in the winter here in New York. I don't have my house at 75 degrees, so just to help it along a little bit, I've added the yeast nutrient to help it out. Alright, so we're done with the second phase of the winemaking. One of the things that's kind of cool about winemaking is that once you get it into the carboy here, start the secondary fermentation, you don't need to adhere to the times on the directions. For instance, let's say it says to check it and rack it again in a week, but you don't get to it, 2 weeks goes by, you're still good, you know, because your wine at this point is finishing its fermentation and aging. So, you know, that's one of the great things about winemaking, especially if you have a very busy lifestyle. You know, at a point, once you get it into the carboy, at that point, you know, if you don't get to it, your wine is continuing to ferment and age. At this point, we're not going to worry so much about topping up the carboy. There's so much carbon dioxide that's coming off that we don't have to worry so much about the gases inside, oxygen affecting the wine. One of the things I do want to emphasize, though, you do want to make sure you sterilize everything very well with cleaning and sanitation and sanitizer, the metabisulfite. Another thing that's very important here is that when you wash out that carboy, and if you do use the metabisulfite, you want to make sure you rinse it out really well, because if you leave excessive metabisulfite in the carboy, it will stop the ferment. It'll kill the yeast, stop the fermentation from happening. So we still want a secondary fermentation to happen here. We want to make sure you rinse that out really well after you clean and sanitize. Alright, so that's it. Look for my next installment, and we'll be racking off of this into another vessel and leaving the sediment behind next time. Okay? If you like what you see here and you are into keeping in touch with what we're doing here with this winemaking, please subscribe to my channel, and in subscribing to the channel you'll get the updates that you'll be aware of when the next part is coming up. Thanks a lot for coming by, and stay tuned.